Hi, Dr. P here for a relatively short confusions of game design. The confusion between intuitive and familiar. So we need some definitions. Intuitive, using or based on what one feels to be true even without conscious reasoning. Instinctive. Familiar, well known from long or close association. Two different things. Intuitive should mean natural to the human race, or at least to one human culture. But most gamers merely mean familiar. Of course, even familiar varies so much when you start talking about different cultures. For example, I've read that Aborigines who grow up without knowledge of modern technology don't recognize maps for what they are. They can't figure it out. They even have trouble understanding photographs because they've never experienced it. So those people using intuitive in relation to games usually mean familiar to hobby game players. Now, so what's actually natural? If you're designing an interface for software and you put a button on the side of the screen, right up against the side, it's easier to find and press than if you put it out in the middle or near the top or the bottom, because the person can move across the button with their mouse and then have to go back. Whereas when they go to the side of the screen and stop, they're stopped by the screen itself. That comes from natural human tendencies. That's intuitive, if anything is. Now, of course, intuition is a little bit different than intuitive. Intuition is coming to a conclusion about something without following a logical process. It happens back in your brain somewhere. It doesn't happen up front where you know how you got there. It can still be correct, of course. And I have discussed this at greater length in a video on my YouTube channel, Intuition versus Logic. Now, we've been talking about game interfaces, and many pundits counsel you that of all the elements of a game, you should be least likely to change the interface from what is typically done. This is more obvious in a video game, but tabletop games have interfaces too. Those interfaces have been used so long that there's rarely changes. Interfaces depend on what's familiar to the players. If you change from the familiar, you risk confusing the players, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do with an interface. You're trying to make the game easier to play. And yet occasionally people do change an interface in some way, and it works, and so it becomes adopted generally. I don't use intuitive to describe game mechanisms or anything else really involved with games. There are better, more accurate words. Using intuitive is lazy, and usually it's wrongly used. Thanks for listening.